X-Men number 16 is the first post-Ten of Swords issue written by Jonathan Hickman, and it delivers on a number of necessary post-event follow-ups, most important of which is the arrival of Arakko, the other half of Krakoa, the two sentient islands that once formed Okarra, the One Land. It's a strong event follow-up with some very memorable moments forecasting what's to come in the world of X and Hickman's X-Men. Today I'll answer, who's going to get the open, quiet council seats that were left post-Ten of Swords? We should have 2 of the 12 seats running the governing body of the mutant nation. Who's going to be on the X-Men? We'll talk about what it means to actually be a part of the X-Men lineup now in this era, and what is stopping Arakko from conquering Earth? How long will it take despite the resolution of 10 of Swords, plus theories and predictions for things to come. Hey everybody, I'm Dave Busing, founder and editor-in-chief of comicbookherald.com. If you like the Comic Book Herald YouTube channel or Krakin Krakoa, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing. This review is Krakin Krakoa number 138. Spoilers for X-Men number 16 and some of what happened in 10 of Swords will follow. Writer Jonathan Hickman, art by Phil Noto, letters by Clayton Cowles. Much like X-Men number 2, X-Men number 16 opens with the arrival of Arakko on Earth, although the post-Ten of Swords landscape makes this pretty different than the first time we had the situation like this. On one hand, I'm laughing at Hickman hand-waving away the ability to transport the whole of Arakko, again, an entire island nation of mutants from another dimension, right next to Krakoa out there in the middle of the ocean, with Cyclops saying he has no idea how it works, but at the same time, that actually took me out of the story a little bit. All they had to do was say some convincing mystical words about the external gate they used to transport it, and I'm probably cool with it all, but there was clearly no interest in really working out the mechanics of how we get, again, Arakko from Amenth, from this hell dimension, into, our Earth as we know it, our dimension. For example, why does this work to bring the entire nation through from Amenth, but Apocalypse and his family are possibly trapped there permanently? That's fairly unclear to me, and I feel like those logistics are kind of important as we consider the role Apocalypse might actually play in the X-Men narrative moving forward. I would like to understand that a little more thoroughly, but again, the intent here is just like, okay, after 10 of Swords, as the event ended, Apocalypse, kind of tricked Saturnine in a way to say that the nation of Arakko and all of the mutants within it are going to be the sort of like the handoff that they give to the Earth mutants, and now that island nation is there. So in theory, now we can have a reforming of the one land of Okarra in the long lost Krakoa and Arakko, which are two halves of the same whole. So we bring the nation together, and it's clear that Arakko is massive in its entirety compared to the island of Krakoa, right? It's this huge, massive land with all these structures on it, and unlike the Arakko Point and Krakoa's lovemaking back in X-Men number 2, when that little part of the island showed up and they really got it on, queued up the Marvin Gaye and got to it. When Arakko and Krakoa go to join this time, there is no love between the islands, okay? They actually reach out and try to touch and get things going, and they're just not feeling it. They're both tired that evening. So Doug asks Krakoa, okay, that wasn't it, how do you guys want to connect with Arakko this time? And both halves, Arakko and Krakoa, the sentient islands, they ent up, right? They go full ent, and this is cool because I think it's the first time in present day we've seen Krakoa actually move around, and it sets the stage for how Krakoa could get involved physically more if needed, same for Arakko, right? The conversation doesn't go as planned though, despite both these halves' feelings in 10 of Swords, clearly indicating that they desperately long for each other. I think some tears were shed, a big part of the goal of that event was Apocalypse wanted to reunite with his family, but also this island, it was split in half. It was sundered a two by the Twilight Sword. Krakoa and Arakko have been without their other for all of that time, but then when they go to meet again, it's not working. So Doug communicates that not only do Arakko and Krakoa want to get back together, or not want to get back together rather, but they literally don't even speak the same language anymore. And what's kind of crucial here too is Redroot, the Arakko mutant who is the translator for that world, for that sentient island, is trapped in Otherworld via Mad Jim Jasper. So we only have Doug Ramsey here as the translator. So Magneto, I think, speaks for everyone in this moment who wasn't feeling X of Swords. So he's all right, if we got the island nation of Arakko here, and it's been thousands of years and they don't even want to get back together. Like, what was the point? What was the point of that event? Which I think is a pretty funny kind of meta reaching through of like, wait, why did we just go through Ten of Swords? And I think, you know, the answer that I'm feeling here is like actually pretty smart, which is that, yes, expansion of mutant kind is the goal in this era, in the Reign of X and for Hickman's X-Men, but it's not, that doesn't mean it's all just going to come on a platter, right? That doesn't mean it's all just going to be super easy and that all these mutants are going to show up from the Arakko now, and that they're just immediately going to increase the X-Men and mutant kinds numbers in these absolutely immeasurable ways. It's still going to lead to conflict. It's still like some details that need to get worked out in terms of how these different, you know, swaths of mutant kind actually get along and get together. So Doug Ramsey reveals that Arakko has 20 times as many mutants as Krakoa. There's a 9-panel reveal of an open council seat here too, as they discuss like what to do with all these mutants of Arakko, which implied to me the likely addition of Iska the Unbeaten to the council. One of the mutants we kind of got to know in some detail throughout the Ten of Swords event. My thinking there was like, oh, they're showing an open seat. They're talking about, okay, what do we do about the mutants of Arakko? They're probably going to want to bring one of them in on the council. I would say in addition to someone from Arakko, I anticipate the remaining Quiet Council seat would go to an Omega level mutant for reasons that will become clear as we continue talking about this issue. I actually think Hope Summers would be a really interesting pick here. She represents the 5, which is something that comes up a ton, obviously, in terms of like decisions the Quiet Council has to make. And I think importantly, she represents the younger generation, which we saw in the most recent New Mutants number 14 by Vita Ayala and Rod Rice, that like the New Mutants don't really have representation on this body, you know, this government body, and also like the youth of Krakoa, essentially of mutant kind, they don't have like things like schools set up, you know. They need somebody who kind of speaks for these people to figure out like what to do with the kids. I think Hope can answer that, but perhaps her, you know, duties on the 5 and Resurrection don't allow for that. I think that could be a trick in the meantime. I think otherwise you have like Bobby Drake, you know, Iceman is a younger mutant to a degree who is an Omega level. Quentin Quire seems like a real wild card pick and fairly unlikely, honestly, but I like picking from the Omega level slate as a fit here. I will also say, like, having 20 times the mutants of Arakko is absolutely fascinating. Expansion of the mutant ranks. Again, this is the key theme of Reign of X, is expansion, but that is troubled if the nation won't join, right? And now this potential ally, right, instead of being like, oh my goodness, the mutant kind's numbers are absolutely unbeatable now on Earth, well, now it's a threat. Now it's the threat of Arakko and all of their people. So this is what, you know, Professor X and Magneto realize, and we get them going to speak with Iska the Unbeaten on behalf of Arakko, and it is a fantastic bit of Hickman dialogue. We have Iska calling Magneto children running a child government. It's so great, and it ties to so much of what I and many others have been saying about Krakoa's, you know, their admitted just like lack of knowledge is how to do this. You know, they're forming a mutant nation, a new mutant nation for the first time. They have a lot of confidence, a lot of bluster. They've been successful in some regards, but they've also made a ton of mistakes, and Iska immediately sees right through that. She sees right through it all the way to the truth, and she says, you are children. Because of course, if the mutants of Arakko have been in Amenth for thousands and thousands of years, right? They have the age of Apocalypse, right? One of the first mutants, at least as far as we knew for a long time prior to that Jason Aaron retcon in the Pages of Avengers, which I covered recently on a different episode of Krakin Krakoa. So Iska the Unbeaten effectively tells Charles and Mags that the Arakko land, you know, the people essentially of this nation, they're too hard. They lived in war. They lived in battling Amenth demons for thousands of years. They are not built for peace, especially with these soft humans that, like, Iska's like, wait, you just let these humans keep on living with you? You haven't conquered them yet? She is kind of like, you know, she's tickled by that. And Magneto and Charles, I feel like they should have known this. Again, their cluelessness about Arakko and about this nation. Again, they weren't there, but like, surely they've given some reports here. Charles standing there with his little housewarming flower. I mean, it's funny, but it's also concerning for the fate of mutant kind. And Iska sniffs this out immediately. You know, she looks very cool here. So Iska the Unbeaten does not want to appear, or does not appear to want, a role on their council. I mean, there's absolutely no implication that this is something should be into, and especially like seeing as Arakko has their own governing body, the Ring. And I don't really see what's stopping Iska and Arakko from more or less conquering not only Krakoa, but like all of Earth once they have their bearings, you know? So they just showed up, they're out of Amenth, they're back where they like originally came from, this being this dimension, and what is to stop them from sort of continuing their warring ways, right? I think that's going to be a really interesting question. I think one possibility in terms of like, okay, what can Krakoa and Mutant kind of offer them? Well, maybe galactic expansion and conquest is how you sell them on the Krakoan Dream. I kind of feel like you have to connect Iska, someone in the ring, to Moira X too, like potentially like bring them in on the full plan, because otherwise what do you have to offer? You know, like I think if you convince Iska or whoever the representative is that like, listen, we have a long game here of mutant dominance throughout, we're not thinking in the present tense. We're not thinking in the moment, which is probably how Arakko thinks. We're thinking long-term mutant survival. I feel like Moira could actually be a very convincing party here to get Arakko on their side, you know? So we get the reveal of the Great Ring of Arakko, of who is officially on this governing body. And already it's fascinating. I mean, it's made up entirely of Omega level mutants, which I love, absolutely love. Plus, the Night Council is a total secret. It's completely redacted. I love that the Arakko mutants will be integrated into the greater X-Men narrative, since those characters were very interesting. And the storytelling potential expands immensely with this whole new nation. I mean, it really, really does. You had all these new characters. You had this whole new realm. It's fantastic expansion of what can be told in X-Men stories. Plus, like, we just more than doubled, you know, maybe not more than, but like we just doubled our Omega level mutants, basically, right? Like this chart of I think it was 14 of the on the Krakoa side, right? Those numbers just expanded immensely. This is huge. Those are the most precious mutant resources as established way back in House of X #1. Now, one thing to talk about here too, I mentioned her previously, but like, what are Moira's thoughts on any of this? What are Moira's thoughts on literally anything we haven't seen her, but especially on all of this, on bringing Arakko? Does this fit into the plan? Is this a new wrench? We don't know. Plus, like, what are Moira's thoughts on precogs? Idol, #2 here on the seat of the Dawn, is a known precognitive mutant. We saw her in Ten of Swords, or we saw that character in Ten of Swords with precognitive visions of how Arakko was going to fall and all the problems they would have with Amenth, right? And it is Moira's position here: no precognitive mutants are allowed, like, in our vicinity in the world. No future tellers are allowed anywhere. Or is it literally just like, no, Destiny is my arch nemesis, please don't bring her back? Because there are so many opportunities for like fortune tellers and future tellers and precognitive mutants and non-mutants, frankly, out there in the world. Like, what if like Doctor Strange or Wanda are running like a scrying spell into the future, right? All these things that could be happening is unless Moira is running like an assassination or information like dispersal campaign, how is she preventing this? How is she preventing precognitive attitudes? How is she preventing this from happening? And now you have Idol. It's another opportunity where it's like, how is she going to prevent this? Just bring Destiny back, or admit that it's specifically Destiny that is the problem for her, which I think actually works maybe a little bit better. So Scott and Jean pass on the open Quiet Council seats that they're offered. There's 2 open seats, and they pass on being on part of this governing body, even though Jean like lost her seat, but then Mags and Charles are like, yeah, we'll just take the vote again, we'll get you back on, no problem. They pass because they're formalizing their plans for, again, this relaunched X-Men, which is another post Ten of Swords takeaway. We saw that they're like, this nation needs the X-Men, okay? And Jean has a really good quote here about like, Krakoa decides like what's best for the nation, but the people need someone who's just fighting for them, and that's what the X-Men are. That's us. This is a really interesting idea too, because Scott and Jean decide they're going to hold an election to decide who's on the team. And I find it fascinating to consider, like, who do mutants think of as their heroes? So not, you know, looking around X-Men fandom and saying like, yeah, Nightcrawler's my favorite mutant, etc., but who would the mutants of this nation actually pick as their own heroes? You know, who are the most visible? I think in many ways becomes a really, really interesting question. The only real criteria we have on, you know, the election protocols is that the mutants can't also be on the Quiet Council. So like, that's the only thing we know, at least you know, that I saw, as far as like who can or cannot be voted for the X-Men. So I think like picking who's actually going to be on this team is going to be a really fun thing. It said in the election poster that we see here, it's going to be announced or decided at the Hellfire Gala, which is the thing that Emma Frost been planning, I think, as far back as like Giant Size Magneto, but into Marauder certainly. So I'm super excited. I'm not gonna like say exactly who I like. Again, I feel like it could literally be any mutant who could be on this X-Men team, you know? So when I think of like classic mutants who I like on the X-Men, again, Nightcrawler, Colossus, if you go back to the original all new, all different X-Men days, it's like, well, yeah, it could be any of them. But it's like, well, Wolverine obviously is like going to be a primary pick, but he's kind of busy with X-Force. You know, do you double up? I think my personal preference here would be the members of the X-Men, I think, should be not involved on other teams. I would prefer it if they weren't already on another unit. If this is our excuse to get Rogue and Gambit off of Excalibur and onto X-Men, I'm all for it, but I would prefer they weren't on both. Same goes with like Wolverine. You know, if he's in X-Force, he has a solo series already. That's plenty of Wolverine. I'm good. He can make cameos, of course. I don't actually want him on the X-Men roster, right, for that reason. So that's going to rule out basically anyone already in a book, which raises the question, like, well, who is remaining then? Like, who doesn't have a book that they're getting a lot of work and a lot of action? And again, I've done like, you know, missing mutant things, but I haven't really done a like, who are the mutants who are kind of overlooked. So maybe that's a weekend Kraken Krakoa that I'll toss out there. Like, who are the mutants who have not gotten enough spotlight in the Hickman era, in the Dawn of X, and now into the Reign of X, who could be a part of this X-Men team and maybe get a lot more to do? Because again, we already have Cyclops and Jean kind of at the center. I'll be curious who else gets picked. I mean, I think Storm is maybe an obvious pick because she hasn't had a ton to do in the Pages of Marauders, and we know big things are coming for her, which ties next to what is coming. The Cohen reads Tyrants for the next issue, X-Men number 17. It's going to be a comic dealing with the Shi'ar Empire, and we know Cyclops, Storm, and Marvel Girl, I presume that's Jean Grey, unless that's what Rachel's going by, are traveling to, which I probably should know. I've just forgotten. So let me know. What are your theories? What are your comments? What are your thoughts on X-Men number 16? This was kind of, in a lot of ways, as most Hickman things are, the comic I was looking for in terms of like actually following up on the big questions and the big asks and what X-Men's going to look like in 2021. I think very excitingly, you know, like this is, okay, Ten of Swords is done now. This is the issue that says, yeah, it's done. Here are the situation as it stands on Earth. Here are the problems we still have to deal with. Where are we going to go from here? And I'm very excited to tackle those and talk about them with you here on Kraken Krakoa. So thanks everybody for listening. As always, you can support my work at comicbookherald.com and on Kraken Krakoa videos at patreon.com/comicbookherald. Excuse me. I'm Dave. You can find my stuff at comicbookherald.com, at Comic Book Herald, pretty much anywhere on social. Look for the best comics ever in My Marvelous Year podcast for more from me. Thanks everybody for listening. And as always, enjoy the comics.